Exodus 32, beginning at verse number 1. It says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will come before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." And Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. And he took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. And afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol, cast in the shape of a calf. And they have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.'" Verse 19 says, when Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. Be seated in the presence of the Lord. Family, verse 3 says, so all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron, and he took them what they handed him and made it into an idol. For just a few moments this morning, family, I want to talk about American idols. I want to talk about American idols. Tell your neighbor, let's be careful not to build American idols. Family, this morning we're closing out this series we've been in, working through together, called May I Take Your Order? And if you've been journeying with us past few weeks through the series, you know that in it we've been chewing together on one central question, one main question. And that question is, what does it look like to pursue godly order in my life? What does that look like in a world filled to the hilt with disorder? What does it look like to consistently overcome that disorder and pursue and live abundantly in God's order? What does it look like to submit to that order as a way of being, to adopt the mindset that comes with that order, to come into active agreement with it, to fully submit to it? What does it look like to establish godly order? And we've reminded one another over and over again over the course of this series. 1 Corinthians 14:33, it says that God is not a God of disorder, but he is a God of peace. And it goes on to say, all things should be done decently and in order. In other words, God has an order. He has a process. He has procedures. He has a divine protocol. He even has a sequence to how he does things. He has a sequence around how he works through to accomplish things and bring things into being in your life. He has a purpose. And when we talk about godly order, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about God's methodologies, his expectations, his guardrails, his standards, his standard operating procedure. We're talking about God's way of doing and being. And not only that, we're talking about the state of peace that we gain access to when we submit to God's order. But as we've noted, establishing godly order is not just about God, it's also about us. God owns the what and the why of godly order, but you and I are accountable for the how of godly order. What do I mean? Godly order doesn't just happen to us. It's not just thrust upon us. Godly order, it has to happen with our participation. Godly order has to be participated in. We have to participate in. Family, listen, there are some things we need to do to trigger and to participate in godly order. I know that's kind of old school sounding, but it's the truth. There's some things that we have to do to participate in godly order. So for the past few weeks, we've been talking about some of those things. We've been talking about habits that when adopted, will help us establish godly order in our lives. In fact, I shared several. It's not an exhaustive list. I think we're going to be building this the rest of my life, me and God, as he helps me personally with this. But we've been talking about a few godly order, a few habits that help establish godly order. Habit number one is an ordered life practices relentless prayer. We've been talking about that. If you want godly order to take root in your life, you've got to grow your maturity in the area of prayer. How relentless is your prayer life? In this season, your prayer life, it has to be relentless. It has to be determined and consistent and unwaveringly persistent, unyielding and unstoppable. Your prayer life cannot weaken. It cannot stricken. It cannot give up, even in the face of challenge and difficulty. An ordered life practices relentless prayer. That was habit number one. Habit number two was an ordered life guards against itching ears. Remember, Paul said in 2 Timothy 4:3-4, he said, a time will come when they, that means us, will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned to fables. Family, what decision have you made concerning your itching ears? How you going to deal with that? I mean, have you decided what you're going to do when your ears, and they will start itching, when your ears decide they want to disregard the truth of God for something that's more convenient or less costly for you to build your life and confessions around? What are you going to do when your ears start itching? An ordered and spiritually mature life will always prioritize sound doctrine over a desire to be spiritually coddled. It always will. It always will. An ordered life will choose biblical truth over cheap grace. It always will. It always will. An ordered life guards against itching ears. That was habit number two. Habit number three, an ordered life actively pursues or processes its pain. An ordered life actively processes its pain. Notice we didn't say that an ordered life actively eliminates sin, though it does. Make no mistake, fam. An ordered, spiritually mature life is like a heat-seeking missile when it comes to sin. It really is. An ordered, spiritually mature life makes absolutely no bones about seeking and destroying every ounce of sin it lays eyes on in your life. The problem is that we too often forget that eliminating sin is not just a matter of discipline. We think it's about hammering ourselves to death and making ourselves do what God tells us to do. But sometimes the process of eliminating that sin requires you to first acknowledge and heal from the pain that opened the door to that sin. You've got to overcome the trauma that trapped you in it. And so godly order is not just about pretending you're free from some stuff. It's about actually getting free from stuff. It's not about performing your way into some placing in your life. It's about actually yielding and submitting to God's work of changing your heart and changing your behavior and transforming your mind so you can get free from some stuff. So family, we've been learning that godly order doesn't just happen to us. It happens through us when we partner with it. Ordered life practices relentless prayer, and ordered life guards against itching ears, and ordered life actively processes its pain. And family, this morning, I want to bring this series to a close with just a few more of these habits for establishing godly order that we find them hidden in the text this morning. And I know you're thinking, Pastor, I thought this text was about idolatry. How are we going to pull some habits out of that? Well, what does idolatry have to do with it? Well, family, I'm glad you asked that question, because I happen to believe, stay with me, I happen to believe that one of the most urgent issues, one of the clearest and most present dangers that the Church of Jesus Christ, universal, is at risk of underestimating in this season is the danger of idolatry. Please work with me here. Please listen to me here. There's danger with idolatry. I mean, Christians of all stripes, all denominational backgrounds and affiliations, all races and national origins, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all of us need a gigantic reality check and reminder in the area of idolatry. Gigantic reality check in the area of idolatry. What do you mean, Pastor? Well, let's start by defining idolatry. What is it? Simply put, idolatry is the practice of idol making. I know that sounds simple, but I need you to sit with that. Idolatry is the practice of idol making. It's the practice of taking things that were created by men and ascribing to them glory that belongs to God. Idolatry, it's when we take stuff, systems or structures, people or personalities, ideologies, emblems, blessings, or gifting, and we elevate them and endue upon them glory that is neither ours to grant or theirs to enjoy. In other words, idolatry is when we treat stuff that ain't God like it's God, and then we build our lives around the lie. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to honor things that are not God as though they are God. It's dangerous to honor people who are not God as though they are God. It's dangerous to place trust in things that are not God as though they are God. It's dangerous to worship and adore things that are not God as though they were God. And here's why. Isaiah 42:8, God himself says, in case you forgot, I am the Lord. That is my name. And I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols. He can't make it ne'er more clear than that. You might ask, why does he care? Is this an ego thing with God? Why does an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-sufficient God full of integrity and truth care if he is acknowledged or reverenced like he's God by us? Well, let me ask you this question. What kind of all-knowing, all-powerful, all-sufficient God full of integrity and truth would he actually be if he allowed an empty and false version of himself to masquerade as the real thing? What kind of integrity would that be? If he allowed some fool's version of himself going around pretending to be God and fooling a bunch of people? What kind of integrity would that be? If he allowed us to fall for a lie in his name? What kind of stewardship of his own name would that show if he just let it be dragged through the mud? God's not going to co-brand with deception. He's not going to let an idol claim and contaminate his good name. He's not going to risk allowing people to be fooled by an empty version of the truth. No, he's going to root out every idol and destroy every lie connected to it, which makes idolatry dangerous. Makes it dangerous. It's the kind of dangerous that caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to say, nah, king, just throw us in the fiery furnace. We'd rather go in the fiery furnace than bow down to your idol. Just throw us in. It's a kind of dangerous that Daniel said, no, bro, you want me to stop praying because I'm supposed to be scared of you? That's idolatry. Throw me head first into the lion's den. It's dangerous to be on the other side of idolatry. When you understand what the spirit of idolatry is, and the claim that it makes, that it offers a reasonable substitute for God. It's just as good, just as powerful, just as important as he is. So you might as well just throw up your hands and trust it. That you don't really need a relationship with the true God. You can just pay homage to it. You can believe in it. You can defend it. You can sign up for it. You can hope in it. You can esteem and trust it as your provider and sustainer. And before you know it, you find yourself deceived by it. Manipulated by it, so fearful of losing it that you'll offer it anything to stick around, including God's seat on the throne of your heart. And just like that, you got your own ready-made American Idol. Idolatry is dangerous, but the truth is there's something alluring about it. In our failed state, there's something about the human condition that makes us want to create and control our own version of God. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. To control and author our own version of truth. To establish our own order. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Rather than submit our hearts to the actual source of order and truth. And look, I don't mean no harm. I really don't. But I feel like we're living in a season where idolatry is in overdrive. In fact, I'm concerned that even in the Church of Jesus Christ, we've come so close to the line on idolatry that we don't even recognize it anymore. Now, I got to choose my words real quick. Carefully here. I know it's election season and y'all be canceling folks, so let me just say this one thing. Politics has become an idol for a lot of folks who claim to know Jesus. I'm just going to say it. And look, I'm not picking one side or the other here. This is an apolitical observation. It's true on both sides of the aisle. But let me just say this. If you're a follower of Jesus and you honestly believe that God needs your candidate to solve everything that's wrong in the world, we need to have a serious conversation. If you prescribe to the notion that your political person is the only person who can fix everything that needs fixing, and their name isn't Jesus, you're closer to the edge of idolatry than I think you realize. Real talk. Real talk. Real talk. If you really believe that your specific ideology, your set of political perspectives, and look, I'm not poo-pooing it. You need a perspective, and you need to go do your research, and you need to vote. But if there's fear in your heart that your political perspective is so pure and true that it is the only thing that represents what a sovereign God of the universe could ever make to intervene and make in the world, if he's got to have your way or it's no way, like everything's going to crumble if God ain't able to use your path, we got a problem, church. Idolatry is dangerous. And look, for that matter, if you find yourself believing that God needs anything from anybody to do his job of establishing order in your life. I mean, if you've said to yourself, well, I wish I just got to get that certain job or that certain education. If I had that certain car, or I lived in that certain zip code, or if I was still in that certain relationship, or I had that certain status, if I lived that certain lifestyle, or I had that certain number of zeros in my bank account, if you've convinced yourself that God needs a certain anything to establish his order, I need to warn you that you're at risk of setting that thing up to become your very own American Idol. You got to be on guard. Whatever that thing is that you keep telling yourself, your mind keeps telling you, your community, your job, whatever that thing is that everybody tells you, your whole life is going to fall apart if X doesn't happen. If that is not Jesus, then we need to do some work. God don't need anything or anybody to establish his order. He can work with many or with few. He can work with great or with small. It's dangerous. Idolatry is dangerous because he shares his glory with no one. And listen, if you put him in a position to ask him for blessings that you'll one day convert into idols, don't be surprised if he ends up killing them to protect you from them. So what does it look like to hone the kind of spiritual maturity that combats the sin and the deception of idolatry? What habits can help us establish godly order when it comes to idolatry? Well, the children of Israel can help us here, even though admittedly we find it in Exodus 32, this is a tragic masterclass in the anatomy of an idolatrous situation. Look at what happened with the children of Israel in this passage. Now understand, by the time we get to Exodus 32, the children of Israel were no more than 3 months from having been delivered from Egypt. No more. They were fresh out of deliverance. 90 days before this text lesson, they were still slaves. And in 90 days, God had established order. Within 90 days, he'd unleashed plagues upon their enemies. Within 90 days, he'd sent death angel through Egypt, killing the firstborn of every household whose doorpost was not covered with the blood of the lamb. 90 days, he'd led them through the wilderness as a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Within 90 days, he'd opened up an entire Red Sea for them to cross on dry ground, and then he stood on their rear guard as they did it. 90 days. Within 90 days, everything had changed for them. This is to say that God had already done some major doing on their behalf. He'd already earned his seat at their table. He'd already proven that nobody deserved his glory, and there was no doubt of his grace. He'd already done all that. So imagine how disappointed he must have been when it was now time to formalize and establish the order. That's what he was doing up on the mountain with Moses. They're about to write down some commandments, and it was time to establish the order. And he was writing that order on a tablet with his own hand, the scripture says. And all of a sudden, he hears a peculiar sound. Moses and Joshua talking amongst themselves. They said to one another, "Is that the sound of war in the camp? It doesn't quite sound like victory. It doesn't quite sound like defeat. Joshua, do you hear singing? It's not a worship day. I didn't leave any instructions for anybody to offer sacrifices to the Lord." But God wasn't confused at all. God knew exactly what the sound was. God knows exactly what it sounds like when his people start trying to establish their own version of order. It's a familiar sound to him. God told Moses, verse 7, he said, "Go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt." So God is saying, "I'm tired of this. Your people, who you brought, they've become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I command 90 days ago. They've been quick to turn their back. And they've made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They bowed down to it and sacrificed to it. And they've said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. Listen, I'm a little tight on time today. I wish I could do this scripture justice, but I wish I could go deep on where the idea of a golden calf came from in the first place. Of all the idols they could have created, why a golden calf? Well, it's unclear if the people actually specifically asked for a golden calf or if that idea came from Aaron. But history, if you open your history books, history will tell you that there was a whole religious cult in Egypt that was built around an oxen deity named Apis. A-P-I-S, if you want to look it up. There was a whole cult built around Apis. Apis was the intermediary between humans and the other gods of the Egyptian pantheon. He was the intermediary. He spoke on behalf of the people to the gods and the gods on behalf of the people. Does that sound familiar? So Exodus 32:1 says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountains, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. What's implied here is they were saying, hey, Aaron, Moses is taking too long up there, and we don't know if he's even coming back. And by the way, he was our intermediary to Yahweh. Aaron, make us an Apis so that we can replace our access to Yahweh with access to the false gods we left in Egypt. That's what they were saying. We need a new intermediary. We need a new way into an old god we left. Build us an Apis, a golden calf that can give us access to the Egyptian gods, and we'll have them go before us. We'll substitute our lack of relationship with Yahweh for a false religion that he's already delivered us from. Family, there's two habits here I need to mention to you. Two habits that I need you to start leaning into to make sure you don't ever have no problem with idolatry like our family did here. Habit number 4, an ordered life is patient with God's presence. An ordered life is patient with God's presence. And then an ordered life values God's leading. How is it that 90 days ago, in fact, some scholars estimated that it might have been as short as 6 weeks. It might have been as short as 6 weeks from when God had delivered Israel from Egypt. How is it that so quickly their hearts could be turned over to idolatry? Could the answer be as simple as Israel was impatient with the presence of God? Could it be that simple? They went all the way on the far side of crazy to create their own God simply because they were impatient. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountains, they gathered around. Some translations say they ganged up on Aaron and said, come make us gods. The first step towards idolatry is Israel's walk with God was that they had no clue how to wait on him. That was their first step toward idolatry. They could not even fathom what it meant to wait on God. They had no understanding of what it even looked like to be on the mountain with God. They didn't understand how long it took to get to the right spot. They had no discernment of what it meant to sit before him as he entered the tent of meeting. They had no familiarity with what it meant to be silent when he spoke. They had no idea of what it felt and looked like to receive the imprint of his words on their heart. They hadn't spent any time with God, so they didn't know what it cost to be there. You can always tell a person who hasn't spent a lot of time with God because they're impatient. You can't emerge out of a mature relationship with God and still be impatient. Family, how patient are you with God's presence? If he doesn't answer you right away, do you go run for an answer of your own? If he doesn't deliver you in whatever way you've defined deliverance, do you go fix it on your own? How are you relative to your patience with God's presence? If you sat before him, if you were called to sit before him and pray and for 90 days and he didn't say nothing to you the whole time, would you just sleep through it or would you still sit before him? We gotta practice some patience with the presence of God. Scripture says the people gathered around Aaron and said, "Come make us gods who will go before us." And for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. How disrespectful. This fellow Moses, how disrespectful. This fellow Moses. We don't know what happened to him. And look, this is another red flag for those at risk of being deceived by idols. How do you appraise what it costs Yahweh to go before you? Have you ever thought about that? What did it cost God to deliver you? What did it cost God to make a way for you? Because I believe he gave the blood of his son. And so just because he doesn't show up like we want to in the moment he wants us to show up, we're going to go run to another God and ask that God to do something to go before us when we don't even know what it costs for a God to go before. This is a red flag. How do you appraise what it costs? How do you know what it looks like for God to make your way and lead your path? See, when we undervalue God's leading, it becomes easy to replace him with a substitute. When we undervalue what he actually does for us in leading us, then it's easy to replace him with a substitute. Sometimes I ask, and I know I wouldn't actually be able to stand it, but I have prayed before, Lord, I wish I could see into the Spirit, like real time. Because I believe if God turned the lights on in this room to the spiritual dimension, you would see all kind of warfare going on around you. You would see all kind of demons trying to attack you in the army of the Lord holding shields and stabbing. You don't even know what it looks like for God to go before you, to make your way, to set your path, to ordain your steps. And when we don't sit with what that really means, the cost of that, then we consider him, in the words of the prophet Beyonce, replaceable. What does it cost? His leading. Because we don't think about that. It's easy to substitute him for a solution we create on our own. In that moment, the people of Israel, they had selective amnesia. Have they really forgotten what it looked like to have a God go before them? They thought they could just create a calf to go before. Have they forgotten the 10 plagues and death angel killing the firstborn? Have they forgotten the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorpost? Have they forgotten being led through the wilderness by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night? Have they forgotten the opening of an entire Red Sea for them to cross on dry ground? When we undervalue God's leading, it becomes easy to assume a substitute will do. An ordered life is patient with God's presence, and it values God's leading. Verse 30, chapter 32, I'm almost done. When the people saw that Moses was so long coming, down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us gods who will go before us. And for this fella, Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. And Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings, what your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. And he took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. And then when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf. Family, hear me. I know this feels extreme, but understand that this right here is the very definition of disorder. This is what disorder looks like. Look what happened here. Israel became impatient with God because Moses delayed with them. And frankly, they did not have a direct enough line of communication with God to solicit his presence without Moses. So they pursued a plan to substitute the real God for a fake one. And then they did two things. They took their earrings off to create a false god, and they stole and reapplied the language of authentic worship to legitimize the false god. Aaron told the people, take off your earrings of gold so that he could melt them down to fashion them into these false gods. Well, where did these earrings of gold come from? They got them from the Egyptians on their way out of town. See, God had promised Israel that they would not leave Egypt empty-handed. Exodus 12, and he was true to his word. By the time the final plague had been unleashed upon Egypt, the Egyptians were so eager for Israel to get out of town, to leave, that they heaped upon them articles of silver and gold and clothing and ornaments so that they would go quickly. So this is to say that Israel and Aaron, they were so deceived that they took the earrings that represented the provision and deliverance of God from slavery. Deliverance of God from bondage. They literally took the testimony out of their ears and melted it down to create a false god. They were deceived. They took the testimony, they ripped it out of their ears and melted it down to make a false god. And then, according to verse 3, they worshiped before it. Family, an ordered life preserves the purity of its testimony. Hear me. It preserves the purity of its testimony. And an ordered life protects the sanctity of its worship. Those are the last two. Ordered life preserves the purity of its testimony and protects the sanctity of its worship. Well, I don't have to tell you what happened next. It was not a pretty scene. Israel eventually recovered in terms of their relationship with God. But Moses came down the mountain and he destroyed the calf. He destroyed a lot of people. He burnt down the calf and mixed it in water and made them drink it. It was an ugly thing. Israel paid a heavy price for the rebellion of God against God that day. Even though God left the door open for them to walk in and make their way to restoration, it was an ugly scene that day. But what about you and I? This is a cautionary tale, y'all. This is a cautionary tale of what it looks like when God's people seek to create their own order, and in so doing, substitute God for a lie. Family, there's some habits that we can pursue that will help us partner with God to bring our lives into order. We don't have to create our own way. We don't have to make up our own order. We don't have to create American idols. An ordered life practices relentless prayer. An ordered life guards against itching ears. An ordered life actively processes its pain. An ordered life is patient with God's presence. An ordered life values God's leading. An ordered life preserves the purity of its testimony, and an ordered life protects the sanctity of its worship. What about you? What are you going to do to unseat your American idols? We might as well not pretend we don't have them. What do we do to unseat them? We hold them up to the standard of the real God. That's what we do. We hold them up to the memory of our testimony. Was it really your job that made that way? Or was it God using the job he gave you today to get you a better job tomorrow? Was it really that relationship that made you whole, or was it a stepping stone for God to mature you into the person that you're called to be? Hold up the idol to the standard of your Savior and see who's left standing. Stand on your feet.